The night my son-in-law told me that my dead husband's ghost was poisoning his meditation space, I understood two things. First, this man had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. Second, Frank, wherever he was right now, was laughing himself sick. Because that's exactly how these stories end, quietly, with a smile and a full stack of evidence in your pocket. Caden Moore just didn't know that yet. He thought he was pushing a quirky old woman out of his house. He didn't know he was inviting in a forensic investigator with 28 years on the job, someone who can read a lie the same way most people read a menu. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story didn't begin with the scandal. It didn't begin with the tinfoil headpiece studded with Swarovski crystals, or with the moment the Maricopa County Sheriff walked into my daughter's living room and found my son-in-law wearing that headpiece while I interrogated an empty chair. It started with a 3 a.m. phone call, and with one word, Mom, delivered in a tone of voice that had me pulling on my jeans before I'd even finished hearing the sentence. I am 64 years old. I live alone in a small house in Tempe, Arizona. I have a cat named Clue, named for her habit of hiding my belongings in places that make a certain sideways sense only in retrospect, and a bookshelf that is nearly full of forensic pathology and criminal investigation textbooks that I haven't been able to throw away since I retired 2 years ago. 28 years with the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's Office, the final 8 as senior forensic detective. I've seen things most people don't encounter even in their worst nightmares, and I've learned to approach those things with an orderly mind and steady hands, and a quiet that other people sometimes mistake for coldness. It is not coldness, it's attention. There is a difference, and the difference matters. When you've spent nearly 3 decades reconstructing the truth from what's been left behind, you develop a particular relationship with honesty. You stop being afraid of it. You go looking for it. And you get very good at spotting the people who are trying to bury it. Frank died 6 years ago, heart attack while on duty, sitting in his patrol car in a shopping center parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in November. Sergeant of the Scottsdale Police Department, 31 years on the force, a heart that everyone who knew him agreed was the size of a house, in every sense of the word. I miss him every single day. Not in the loud, performed way that needs an audience, but quietly, over the morning's first cup of coffee, when I reach across the table out of pure muscle memory to say something small and ordinary and find nothing there. We had 32 years together, Frank and me. We laughed the same way, slowly at first, building, until it took us over completely. Our daughter Pamela used to say we were embarrassing. She said it the way teenagers say things like that, with a roll of her eyes and a smile she was trying very hard not to show. She has Frank's eyes. She has my stubbornness. I consider both excellent qualities, and I've told her so, and she has rolled those Frank eyes at me many times since. Pamela called at 3 a.m. on the 12th of February, 31 weeks pregnant, experiencing contractions that were coming with unsettling regularity. Caden in the background, sounding like a man who had studied panic and was now giving a very committed performance. The doctor was on the phone, saying it was most likely Braxton Hicks, the body rehearsing, not the real event, but better to come in and be checked. Mom, Pamela said, and that was all she had to say. I was already moving. I packed what I needed in 20 minutes. 20 minutes because I packed efficiently and because I've learned over many years that the things you genuinely need are fewer than you think. I called my neighbor Margaret about the cat. I was on the highway before 4 a.m, the desert dark on both sides, the stars over Arizona the way they only are at that hour when no one else is awake to see them. The contractions turned out to be exactly what the doctor had suspected. Braxton Hicks. Practice runs. Pamela was sent home with instructions to rest, to stay hydrated, to avoid stress. The doctor, a calm, thorough woman named Dr. Reyes, who I liked immediately, said everything looked fine. The baby was healthy. They just needed to be careful for the next 9 weeks. Pamela was relieved and embarrassed about the fuss, and very glad I was there. I stayed. It was the obvious thing to do, and I had no compelling reason to go back to the empty house in Tempe, and my daughter was 8 months pregnant and needed someone in her corner who wasn't going to start talking about energetic fields the moment things got difficult. Their subdivision was on the eastern edge of Scottsdale, the kind of neighborhood that was designed to look deliberate. Red-tiled roofs, desert landscaping, streets that curved pleasantly around a central park where nobody seemed to go. Their house was the one with the lavender bush by the mailbox, which turned out to belong to the neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Gloria, who waved at us every morning from her porch and whose lavender produced a smell so aggressively cheerful in the early morning that it briefly made everything seem manageable. The house itself was good. 3 bedrooms, an open floor plan kitchen and living room, a backyard with a pool that had a light film of algae across the surface, and 2 patio chairs that had clearly not been moved in months. The nursery was half finished, walls painted a soft yellow, a crib still in its flat-packed box leaning against the wall, a mobile of small paper birds hanging from the ceiling that Pamela had made herself over several evenings. I noticed she'd made 12 of them. I didn't say anything about the unassembled crib. Pamela had bought the house 2 years before the wedding. She'd been working as an accountant for a small firm in Scottsdale at the time, doing well, careful with money in the way that people who grow up watching their parents be careful with money tend to be. The down payment came from savings and from a small inheritance from my mother, Frank's mother-in-law, who had loved Pamela without reservation and left her something to show it. The mortgage was in Pamela's name, her name alone. She'd told me this when she bought it, and I had been glad. I mention this because it matters. It matters a great deal, as things turned out. Caden Moore. I had met at the wedding 3 years ago and 2 or 3 times at holidays since then. I had formed an impression of him at the wedding and not significantly revised it afterward. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of face that photographs exceptionally well and looks in person like it knows this. He had attentive eyes that gave the impression of listening very carefully, and a voice he kept just below the natural volume of conversation, a fraction too quiet so that you found yourself leaning in slightly to hear him, which meant he had your posture before he had your attention. He sold online courses, quantum healing for the modern soul, energetic alignment, your 30-day journey, the chakra reset method, $499 per course. He described himself on his website as a certified energy practitioner and quantum wellness guide, though I could not establish, on examining the site carefully, what organization had certified him or what the certification represented. He had several hundred glowing testimonials. I'd read a number of them and noted they shared certain stylistic tics that suggested a common author, or at least a very specific template. I want to be precise about something. I did not dislike Caden because of what he sold. People sell extraordinary things and believe in them genuinely and sometimes help people with them. I am not interested in arguing about what deserves to be called medicine or healing or practice. What I am interested in is patterns. Specifically, the pattern of a man who controls what his wife eats for breakfast, who his wife speaks to, how his wife uses her own money, and whether her mother is welcome in her own house. That pattern I know well. I've seen what it costs people. And I was watching for it from the second morning of my visit over a cup of coffee that I had made myself because I am 64 years old and I am not going to drink something called vibration tea at 7 in the morning. The first real conversation happened on the fourth evening. Pamela had gone to lie down. Dr. Reyes had been firm about rest, and Caden asked me to stay in the kitchen after dinner. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, folded his hands, and looked at me with an expression that I recognized as someone who had prepared this moment. Not rehearsed the words necessarily, but settled on the approach. The approach was gentle authority. The tone of someone delivering difficult but necessary information that they've been carrying with reluctance. "Eleanor," he began, and I noticed he used my first name with the ease of someone who has decided that first names signal intimacy. "I've been wanting to talk to you since you arrived. I've put it off because I didn't want to add to the stress, given everything with Pamela. But I think honesty is important. I believe in it." "So do I said. I meant it differently than he did. He acknowledged this with a slight nod, as if I'd said something that confirmed his approach. Then he told me about my aura. He was thorough about it. My aura was heavy, he said, dense. It carried what he called death imprints, the accumulated energetic residue of my career, which had placed me in sustained proximity to violent endings and human trauma. He said this not accusingly, but with a kind of sorrowful professionalism, the way a dentist tells you about a problem that will only get worse if ignored. He said it was not my fault. He said he bore me no ill will. He said the problem was simply that my presence in the house was creating interference in the energetic environment, which was affecting his practice, which was affecting his income, which was, and here he paused with the timing of a skilled storyteller, affecting his ability to provide properly for Pamela and their baby. I looked at him across the kitchen table. The overhead light was on because it was evening, and the desert outside the window was already completely dark in the way that desert goes dark all at once, without the gradual dimming that happens in places with more humidity and more trees. I thought about my career, about the specific quality of attention it had trained into me, the ability to separate what a person is saying from what a person is doing. Caden was saying he was concerned about the energetic atmosphere of his home. What he was doing was identifying me as a problem that needed to be removed or managed, dressing that objective in language he knew I'd have difficulty arguing with, because any argument would be characterized as evidence of the very density he was describing. "Your aura," I said. "It's very clear to me," he said. "I've worked with energetic fields for 12 years. I can see and feel disturbances that most people are unaware of. Your skepticism, and I can feel that too, Eleanor, it's quite pronounced. That's another layer of it. Skepticism creates its own kind of interference. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's a defense mechanism, and it makes sense given your history. But it does make things more difficult for me, and honestly, for the space we're all sharing." "My sincere apologies," I said, "to the space." He didn't quite smile. He moved on. He had a solution, he said. His teacher, a man named Ray Santiago, a gifted practitioner with deep experience in what Caden called archetypal imprint work, offered a series of sessions designed specifically for this kind of situation. Professional trauma, energetic density, the particular weight of careers like mine. 3 sessions, $1,200, results guaranteed, in the sense that Ray stood behind his work completely. $1,200, I said. "I know it sounds like a significant investment," Caden said, "but think of it as investing in the health of your relationship with Pamela, in the environment your grandchild is going to be born into. That's not a small thing, Eleanor." I looked at him for a moment. Then I said I would think about it. He looked relieved in a way that suggested he'd expected more resistance, which told me something useful. He was used to winning this conversation eventually, but he'd met people who made him work for it. I thought about it for exactly 22 minutes. Then I opened my laptop. The search took the better part of 2 hours. Ray Santiago's website was attractive and vague in equal measure. His biography described him as having over 15 years of experience in the field of energetic and spiritual transformation, which told me nothing specific about where or how that experience had been acquired, since 15 years of experience doing a thing that requires no credential is simply 15 years. There were testimonials, effusive, structurally identical, none of them traceable to verifiable individuals. There was a professional photograph of Ray that had the quality of all professional photographs on websites like this. Warm light, direct gaze, the particular expression of someone performing trustworthiness. I saved the website. Then I searched Caden. His LinkedIn, as I mentioned, ended in 2014, cutting off at a point where he'd listed 2 years at the University of Arizona under the major of marketing, no degree listed. His website's About page described his journey to becoming a healer with a narrative arc that was emotionally coherent and professionally empty. A period of personal darkness, a turning point, a discovery, a calling. No institutions, no verifiable training, no dates. Just the story of a transformation, which was at this point a format I had encountered enough times to recognize as a particular kind of template. I found the forum post at 11:47 in the evening. The site was dedicated to discussions of alternative wellness and spiritual community, and the post was from early 2019. The username was Desert Rose AZ. She wrote about her husband, a man who practiced energy work, who had slowly surrounded their life together with rules about what she could eat, who she could see, what she could bring into their home. She wrote about the creeping isolation. She wrote about the money, how much of it went where, how the explanations were always just convincing enough, how she told herself she was supporting something meaningful. She wrote about the final push, which was an announcement that he wanted to reclassify their shared home as a nonprofit spiritual center, which she hadn't understood at first, and then had, with help, understood exactly. She had gotten out. She didn't give details about how. She wrote to tell other women, if this sounds familiar, you are not imagining it. Below the post, a comment from a user called RiverRock88. This is my life you are describing. If you want to talk, message me. I went through this 3 years ago. His name was Caden. I stared at that for a long time. Then I screenshotted it. Then I wrote a short, careful message to RiverRock88, explaining who I was and why I was writing, and went to bed knowing I probably wouldn't sleep much and being right about that. She answered at 7 the next morning. Her name was Melissa Hart. She was 42, lived in North Phoenix, worked as a paralegal for a family law firm, which she told me with a brief, dry laugh, noting the particular irony of that. She had been married to Caden Moore for 2 years, from 2017 to 2019. She called me at lunchtime and we talked for an hour and 15 minutes. She was clear, organized, and precise. She had the speech of someone who had told this story before, processed it carefully, and arrived at a place where she could describe it without flinching. The progression, as she described it, was almost elegant in its patience. He'd moved in after 6 months of dating, which had seemed natural. The practice equipment started arriving, the bowls, the crystals, the oils, which had seemed like professional tools, reasonable. The rules about the home started as preferences, became expectations, became requirements. Friends who didn't hold compatible energy were gradually excluded from the space. Her sister, after a difficult visit, became someone Caden referred to as an energetic disruption, and Melissa had found herself engineering reasons not to invite her. Her mother, after asking too many direct questions about the finances, was described as someone who vibrated in opposition to their growth, and Melissa had reduced contact. "I can see all of this clearly now," she said. "When you're in it, it happens at exactly the speed at which you can rationalize each step. He's good at calibrating that." "The money," I said. $41,000 over 2 years, Melissa said. "Not all at once, in pieces. Equipment, courses for his own development, the sessions with Ray." Ray was already in the picture. He was introduced as a mentor Caden had found. "Conference travel, a retreat space rental that I never saw any documentation for." By the time I started asking questions, it was already gone. I wrote down 41,000, underlined it. "The house," I said. "That was the final piece," she said. He announced very casually, as though it were obvious and good news, that he was looking into reclassifying our home as a nonprofit spiritual center. He explained the tax benefits, which were real. What he didn't explain was the rest of it, that the reclassification would have restructured the legal status of the property in ways that would have made it very difficult for me to claim my share in a divorce. "My cousin is an attorney. I told her what Caden had described. She told me to get out immediately and save every document I could find." A pause. "I was lucky. Not everyone has a cousin who's an attorney." "Melissa," I said, "would you be willing to give a formal statement?" A longer pause this time. "What's happening with your daughter?" I told her. The bank statements, the draft application for reclassification I'd found referenced in a document inquiry service. Daniel had found it. I'll get to Daniel. The pattern that matched hers so precisely it made my teeth ache. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes, whatever you need. I've been waiting for 3 years for this to catch up with him, and I want to be useful when it does." I thanked her. I told her to write everything down, every detail she could remember, every date, every specific amount, every word he'd said that had stuck with her, and to keep it safe. She said she already had most of it written down. She'd been keeping notes since the divorce. "Just in case," she said. "I always thought there would be a next time." That night was the first full night I spent working rather than sleeping. I'd had those in my career, the ones where a case required you to stay with it until it gave you what you needed. This was the same kind of night. I sat at the small desk in the guest room with the door closed and worked through what I had and what I still needed. What I had: bank statements showing $23,400 in practice equipment and supplies over 2 years, $8,000 in personal transfers to Caden's separate account, a joint account in which Pamela's direct deposits were the primary income source, a web of purchases that would not look like professional expenses to anyone examining them with the specific question of whether they constituted legitimate business costs, since the business itself was not registered. A forum post and a woman in Phoenix named Melissa Hart, who had lived this before and come out the other side and kept her notes. What I needed: verification of the property reclassification draft, the full picture on Ray Santiago, confirmation of the income tax situation, and, this was the most important thing and I knew it, I needed Pamela to be ready to hear it. I called Daniel Ogilvy the next morning from the car, parked at the end of the block with the engine off. Daniel was a family law attorney I'd met 15 years ago through a case, a situation where our professional paths had crossed and we'd each found the other useful and subsequently become the kind of friends who don't talk often but trust each other completely when they do. He was meticulous, unhurried, and possessed of the particular capacity to listen to a complicated situation and identify the 3 or 4 elements that actually mattered. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. "Send me the bank statements," he said when I finished. "Already sent." "The mortgage documentation?" "Sending now." "Is he filing taxes on the course income?" "That's one of the things I need you to find out." He was quiet for a moment.
"Eleanor, the property reclassification. You said a draft was referenced in a document inquiry. Where?"
I explained. Daniel had a contact at a document search service who had located a draft application filed through an online legal preparation service for the reclassification of the Scottsdale property to nonprofit status. The draft had been initiated 3 weeks before my arrival. It had not been finalized. It was sitting, active, waiting to be completed or allowed to expire. "3 weeks before you arrived?" Daniel repeated. "Yes." "So this was in progress before you were even in the picture?" "Yes." Another pause. When Daniel speaks after pauses, the thing he says is always worth waiting for. "Eleanor, I need 3 days, possibly 4. Don't do anything yet." "I'm doing something right now," I said, "but I'll wait on the legal piece." "What are you doing right now?" I told him about Sergeant Frank and the 19 residents. There was a long silence on the line. Then Daniel said, "Eleanor?" "Yes?" "You're a remarkable woman." "I'm told the spirits agree," I said, and hung up. The breakfast table ritual had begun by this point and was well established. Every morning I came to the kitchen with my notebook and delivered what I described as communications from Sergeant Frank and the assembled members of his former platoon. Frank, I reported, had strong opinions about household management. He found the state of the pool an affront to orderly living. He was monitoring the refrigerator for items purchased before the household had any intention of using them and left to quietly expire. He had particular views about a man who ran 3-hour seminars from a living room couch and then required 2 hours of recovery time. He noted, with the measured disappointment of a man who had worked 31 years in law enforcement and understood the relationship between order and community, that the trash had not gone out on the appointed day for the 2nd week running. Caden's response to all of this evolved across those mornings in a way I found instructive to watch. The first morning, he had been dismissive. He explained, not unkindly, as though to someone who had misunderstood the rules of a game, that spirits did not communicate through breakfast table bulletins from retired forensic examiners. The second morning, he was pointedly patient, which is a form of condescension that requires more energy to maintain than genuine patience does. The third morning, he said nothing at all, and communicated instead through a silence that he clearly intended to be dignified, and that instead had the quality of a person holding their breath. The fourth morning, he tried a new approach. "Eleanor," he said, setting down his smoothie and looking at me with what I can only describe as performed equanimity. "I want to try something different. I've been resistant to engaging with this on its own terms, and I think that resistance is my own limitation. If you're genuinely experiencing contact, if this is real for you, then I want to honor that. Can we talk about what Sergeant Frank is communicating? I'd like to approach this as an open conversation." I looked at him. He was good, I'll give him that. When the direct approach wasn't working, he pivoted with real smoothness to a posture of openness and curiosity, which was designed to accomplish 2 things: make me feel heard, so I'd lower my guard, and reestablish him as the authority on the spiritual terrain, so I couldn't occupy it without going through him. It was actually a sophisticated move. I recognized it because it was essentially the same move that certain witnesses make in interrogation. When denial isn't working, try enthusiasm. Frank says, I said pleasantly, that the real question isn't what he's communicating. The real question is why a man who makes his living telling other people how to read energy has been unable, in 8 days, to notice that someone in his household is not what she appears to be. Caden set down his smoothie. He also says, I continued, that in his experience, the people who talk most about reading vibrations are usually the last people in the room to read the room. A silence. Pamela had her hand over her mouth again. Behind her hand, I knew without looking, she was not frowning. Caden left the table. In the hallway, I heard him on the phone. Low voice, clipped sentences, the tone of someone reporting a problem to someone they trust. I picked up my coffee and went to find out what the bird of paradise in the backyard was called, because it had occurred to me during breakfast that I'd been looking at it every morning without knowing its name. Daniel called on the third day, mid-afternoon, while I was in the backyard with a library book I wasn't reading. I went to the car again. Old habit. Important calls happen where walls don't hear. All right, he said. Here's what I have. First, he has no tax filings for the past 2 years. The course income, the session income, none of it has been reported. The IRS will have questions. Second, I pulled the draft reclassification application. It's complete as a draft, detailed actually, with specific language about educational programming and community benefit that someone put real effort into. The Scottsdale address, filed in his name, not Pamela's. Her name does not appear in the document at all, despite the fact that she is the owner of record. I had been expecting this. Expecting it, and still, when Daniel said it plainly, something tightened in my chest for a moment. My daughter's house. Being reclassified without her name on a single page of the application. How long does the draft stay active, I asked. Through this service, 90 days. The draft is 63 days old as of today. So, we have 27 days before it expires automatically. Correct. If he finalizes and files it before then, the process begins. If it expires, he'd have to start over. Eleanor, if this had gone through, the legal complications for Pamela in any future property dispute would have been significant. Not insurmountable, but significant and expensive. His previous marriage, I said, did you find anything? Phoenix, 2019. Divorce finalized in September. The filing included a financial misconduct allegation. The wife's attorney submitted a brief, but it was withdrawn before the hearing. The case settled privately. The wife is Melissa Hart. She's already spoken with me. She'll provide a statement. A pause. Then, with quiet precision, Eleanor, with the tax issue, the undisclosed draft application, and a corroborating witness from a prior relationship, you have a substantive case. Potentially criminal on the tax side, certainly actionable on the financial exploitation angle. I know, I said. I need one more thing from you. Name it. Ray Santiago. Everything you can find. I'll have it by tomorrow morning. I sat in the car for a few minutes after we hung up. The sun was doing what it does in Arizona in March, pressing down warm and flat, without shade unless you made your own. I thought about Pamela, about how to give her information that would change everything, in a way that she could actually hear it rather than defend against it. Because here's the thing about people who are in the middle of something like this. They are not simply uninformed. They are invested. They have built a life around a version of events. To be told that the version is false is not only painful, it is disorienting in a way that can make people reject the truth and retreat further into the story they know. I'd seen it in witness interviews. I'd seen it in family members of victims. I'd seen it in good, intelligent people who loved someone and could not afford emotionally to see them clearly. Pamela was intelligent. She was stubborn. She was, underneath the accommodations she'd made over 3 years of marriage, fundamentally honest. I knew my daughter. I needed to give her the truth in a form she could hold without flinching. I needed the right moment and a contained space, and the documents already spread out in front of her so there was no question of interpretation. Just the facts on the page, and her reading them, and me beside her, not pushing, just present. The moment came 2 days later, courtesy of Caden's own schedule. He announced at breakfast that he was running an open community seminar, free to join online, voluntary contributions welcome, and that he'd appreciate the house being energetically clear during the session, which meant Pamela and I should not be in the main rooms. Pamela said she needed to go to the pharmacy anyway. I offered to come with her. In the pharmacy, while Pamela stood in the prenatal vitamin aisle making careful comparisons that I think were partly about the vitamins and partly about having something absorbing to do with her attention, I touched her arm. "Pam." She looked at me. "When we're in the car," I said. She put the vitamins in the basket. We went to the car. I had the documents on my laptop, organized the way I organize evidence. Cleanest facts first, context building underneath. The bank statements, the highlighted figures with the category labels I'd added, the description of the draft reclassification application, Daniel's summary, precisely worded, with the key legal implications flagged, the forum post, a 3-paragraph summary of my conversation with Melissa Hart. "Read it," I said. "All of it. Take your time." She read. I did not watch her. I looked out the windshield at the parking lot.
A woman was returning a cart to the corral, walking with the deliberate care of someone whose back hurts. A child in a passing car pressed both hands against the window. The pharmacy's sign buzzed faintly in a frequency I could feel more than hear. Pamela read for almost 8 minutes. I know because I was counting. "Mom," she said finally. Her voice was the level kind. I waited. "I knew about the money," she said. "Not the total. I knew we spent a lot on equipment. He always had explanations. They made sense in the moment. I don't know if I believed them or if I just couldn't afford to look at them too hard." "I understand," I said. "The house." She stopped, started again. "He never mentioned filing anything about the house. We talked about the idea of it once, theoretically, as a tax strategy. He presented it as something we might consider together someday. He never said he'd already—" She stopped again. "It's a draft," I said, "not finalized. Nothing has gone through." "But he was going to do it without telling me." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "And Melissa Hart." Pamela looked at the name on the screen. "His first wife?" "Yes." "He told me they ended things mutually, that they'd grown in different directions." "She has a different account," I said. Pamela set the laptop on the seat between us very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady. Outside, the woman with the bad back had made it back to her car and was sitting in the driver's seat with the door still open, head tilted back, resting. "Mom," Pamela said, "what do you want me to do?" "I want you to decide what you want to do," I said. "But I want you to decide based on what's actually true, not the version you've been given, the actual truth." A long silence, the kind that costs something. "Can you help me?" she asked finally, not as a child asking, as one adult asking another. "Yes," I said. "That's why I came." She nodded once, looked out the window for a moment. Then she turned to me with something in her face that I recognized because I'd seen it on her father's face many times. The particular expression of someone who has made a decision and is done deliberating about it.
Do what you need to do, Mom, she said. I trust you. I am not a sentimental woman by disposition. 28 years of forensic work will rearrange your relationship with sentiment. But that sentence, said in that voice, in that parking lot outside a Scottsdale pharmacy, is something I will carry for the rest of my life. I nodded, said we should get back before the seminar ended, started the car. Daniel called the next morning with the Ray Santiago file, and it was, in its way, a masterpiece of a particular kind of human ingenuity. Raymond Diaz, born in Tucson, enrolled at the University of Arizona in the fall of 2011, declared marketing as his major, and was expelled in the spring of 2013 for academic integrity violations, the specific nature of which Daniel's contact hadn't been able to determine, but which the university's records confirmed had occurred. His listed dormitory for the 2012 academic year, Manzanita Hall, room 214. His roommate for that year? Caden Moore. I sat with that for a moment. The teacher who had never been described as an old friend, the mentor who had been introduced to someone Caden had found on his own healing journey. $1,200 a session, a split whose exact terms I didn't know, but whose existence I now had no doubt about. Better Business Bureau, I said. 5 complaints in the past 3 years, Daniel said, all resolved before formal action, 3 of them with partial refunds. The language in the complaints is consistent. Misrepresentation of credentials, failure to deliver promised results, pressure tactics around additional sessions. 5 complaints is a pattern, I said. 5 confirmed complaints is a pattern, Daniel said. The actual number is likely higher. I thanked him, asked him to prepare a package, everything we had, organized for potential use. He said he'd have it ready. Then I called Melissa. Tomorrow, I said, be available. I'll be here, she said. Eleanor, how is your daughter? Steady, I said. She's Frank's daughter. She'll be steady. That evening, while Caden was on a call in the bedroom and Pamela was in the bath, I sat at the kitchen table and made the call I had been calibrating for 3 days. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, Civil Matters Line. I explained the situation concisely and specifically. A residential property in Scottsdale being used for unlicensed commercial activity on an ongoing and documented basis with revenue generated without tax registration. I used the vocabulary of facts rather than the vocabulary of grievance. The duty officer was professional and thorough. He said an inspector would come by the following day. I said that would align well with the practitioner's schedule, since he ran open online sessions on weekday mornings and one was planned for the next day. The officer noted this without comment. I went to bed at 11 and was asleep by 11:15. I have learned over a long career to sleep when sleep is available. Tomorrow would require me to be clear. The seminar began at 10 in the morning. By 10:15, Caden was settled at his laptop in the living room, headphones on, the grid of student faces on the screen, his voice in its practiced register. Something about recalibrating the baseline frequency of your physical vessel. I was in the kitchen with coffee, listening to the muffled sound of it through the door, timing my entry. I went in at 10:37. He saw me immediately, and his expression went through 3 stages very quickly. Surprise, irritation, composure, before settling on a kind of taut professionalism. He held up one finger. Wait. I didn't wait. I walked to where I was visible in the frame. He pressed mute. Eleanor, I'm in a live session. I know, I said. I have a message from Sergeant Frank. On the screen, several faces shifted. One woman leaned forward slightly. This is not the time, he started. Sergeant Frank Marsh, I said, and I addressed the screen directly, the way I used to address juries when I testified. formerly sergeant of the Scottsdale Police Department, 31 years of service, passed in 2018. Currently residing in this property along with 18 members of his former unit, wishes to make the following statement to those present. The room was completely still. Caden had gone very quiet. Not the performed quietness, a different kind. First, I said, this house belongs to his daughter, Pamela Marsh. It was purchased in her name with her funds prior to her marriage. Her name does not appear in a draft legal application that was filed 3 weeks ago, seeking to reclassify this property as a nonprofit spiritual educational center. The sergeant finds this omission notable. A face in one of the windows had gone carefully neutral in the way of people who are listening very hard. Second, I said, the commercial income generated from this address over the past 2 years has not been reported to the IRS. The sergeant, who took his civic obligations seriously, considers this a problem. Eleanor, Caden said. His voice had a warning in it. Third, I said, the practitioner, Ray Santiago, whose clearing sessions are offered to clients of this practice at $1,200 for 3 sessions, attended the University of Arizona at the same time as the operator of this practice, shared a dormitory room with him for 1 academic year, and has been the subject of 5 Better Business Bureau complaints regarding misrepresentation of credentials. The sergeant is aware that the connection between them has never been disclosed to clients. Silence. The session was muted on Caden's end, which meant the students could see us but not hear us. Several of them were watching with an attention that suggested they were doing exactly what I'd hoped they were doing, deciding whether to close the window or stay. I looked at the camera directly. The sergeant recommends that everyone present save their payment receipts and consult with a consumer protection resource of their choice. He wishes you all a good morning. I stepped back. I believe I've said everything he wanted to share. I'll see myself out. I walked back to the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Caden pull off his headphones. I heard him close the laptop. I heard his footsteps, and then the silence of a man standing very still, and then the footsteps again. He came into the kitchen. He stood in the doorway, and the expression on his face was something I hadn't seen on it before. Stripped. The smoothness was gone. Underneath it was something that was not grief and not fear, but something adjacent to both. The expression of a person who has realized that the thing they believed was under control is not. "What have you done?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Made a statement," I said, "on record." "Those are people's livelihoods Those are people who have been paying an unregistered business for services from an undisclosed associate," I said. "Whatever they do with that information is their decision. I made the information available." "You had no right." "In approximately 25 minutes, I said, an inspector from the sheriff's office is going to ring that doorbell. He's coming about the unlicensed commercial use of this property. I'd suggest you use the time to think about what you'd like to say to him and whether you'd like to say it with an attorney present." He stared at me. I want to describe this moment accurately because it mattered. Caden Moore, in the 7 days of my visit, had never quite looked at me directly. There had always been the managed gaze, the practiced eye contact that creates the impression of focus, while actually performing a calculation about the person in front of you. This was the first time he looked at me without any management at all, just him and what he was seeing, which was someone who had come to this house with the intention of doing exactly what she had done, and had done it. "Call a lawyer," I said. "Not Ray, a lawyer." Behind him, Pamela appeared in the hallway. She had heard. She had probably been in the hallway for a while, which is a thing I had raised my daughter to be smart enough to do when it mattered. She looked at her husband. He looked at her. "After the inspector leaves," she said to him, "we need to talk." Inspector Carl Waters arrived at 11:03. He was a compact man in his early 50s with the bearing of someone who had been doing this long enough to find most situations recognizable, and the attentiveness of someone who had been doing it long enough to know that the ones that looked recognizable sometimes weren't. He came in, looked around the living room, the laptop, the singing bowls arranged on the side table, the crystals on the windowsill, the dried sage bundles in a ceramic holder, and asked his questions with the unhurried precision of someone taking notes in a place he'd returned to. He was there for an hour and 20 minutes. He took photographs of the equipment. He asked Caden about registration and tax status and received answers that were technically responses without being informative, which Carl Waters noted with the patience of a man who has heard many technically responsive non-answers. He gave Caden a written notice regarding the requirement to cease commercial operations from a residential property until appropriate licensing was obtained, and a website address for the Small Business Registration Office. He asked me on the way out how long I'd been in Maricopa. 28 years, I said, forensic examiner. He looked at me with a recognition that forensic people have for each other. Clean work, he said quietly. Thank you, I said. The job requires it. The conversation between Pamela and Caden lasted from 2 in the afternoon until nearly 6. I was not in the house for most of it. I drove to a coffee shop, ordered something I didn't drink, sat at a table near the window, and thought about Frank. I thought about the way he'd handled the hard conversations in our own life, because we'd had them, everyone does, which was to say what was true and then get quiet and let the other person come to where they needed to be at their own speed. He had patience for that. He understood that you couldn't drag someone to a conclusion. You could only make the conclusion available and wait. I drove back at 6. Pamela was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a glass of water, and the particular stillness of someone who has done something difficult and is waiting to feel what that costs them. Caden's car was still in the driveway. I sat across from her. He's packing, she said. Okay, I said. He tried for 2 hours to reframe it. She said this without rancor, with a kind of exhausted clarity. Every time I brought up something specific, the documents, the money, Melissa, he had an explanation. Not a good one, but a careful one. He's very good at careful explanations. I know, I said. What made me certain, she said, wasn't any of the big things. It was the Ray Santiago piece, that they went to school together. She shook her head slowly. 3 years. Not once. Not, oh, funny story, I actually knew Ray from college. Not anything. That's not a lapse. That's architecture. I nodded. He says he'll stay somewhere else while we sort out the legal side, she said. He says he doesn't want to make things harder than they need to be. A pause. I told him I appreciated that. I think I meant it. It's complicated. It is, I said. Mom? She looked at me. Thank you. I'm your mother, I said. It's the job. She smiled, slowly, the way a smile comes back to someone after it's been away for a while. Then she said, Tell me the crystal Swarovski hat was real. Tell me that was a real thing that happened. I have a prototype, I said. Would you like to see it? She laughed. Real, full, the laugh I hadn't heard since I arrived. Caden left on the 3rd morning. He loaded the car himself, taking his time with the equipment, the bowls in bubble wrap, the crystals in a soft case, the oils packed upright in a crate he'd brought from the garage. I sat on the front steps with my coffee. The lavender from Gloria's bush was doing its cheerful morning thing. Caden made 3 trips. On the final one, he stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked at me. "Are you satisfied?" he asked. I thought about this genuinely for a moment. "No," I said. "Satisfied is what I feel after a long walk or a good meal. What I feel right now is that what needed to happen has happened. Those are different things." He nodded once, as if this were an answer he could almost respect. Then he got in his car and drove away. I finished my coffee. The desert was doing the thing it does in the morning when the light is at a low angle, making everything look ancient and certain, the cactus and the rock and the hard, pale sky. I thought about Frank, because I think about Frank most mornings. I thought about how he'd have felt sitting here, watching all of this conclude. He would have had something brief to say. He would have been satisfied, which he was allowed to be, because he had not been the one working the case. Daniel called a week later. The IRS had opened a preliminary inquiry. Melissa's statement, combined with 5 Better Business Bureau complainants she'd helped identify, resulted in a coordinated filing that Daniel described as comprehensive. Ray Santiago's Center for Spiritual Healing went dark within 10 days. Website down, phone disconnected, the warm-lit professional photograph gone from the internet. The property reclassification draft expired without action on day 90. Pamela's house remained Pamela's house, fully and without complication. The financial recovery took longer. Courts do. But Daniel was patient and very good, and the judgment that came through 4 months later was enough to furnish the nursery completely with something left for a savings account in Frank Jr.'s name. 3 months after Caden left, I was sitting in Pamela's kitchen on a Tuesday morning in late April. The desert was blooming, saguaro flowers, the pale yellow blossoms of the palo verde, the hot pink of the bougainvillea someone had planted along the back fence years before we arrived, and which grew with the magnificent indifference of something that doesn't require permission. In my arms, 7 weeks old, approximately 8.5 pounds, possessing his grandfather's exact expression of judicious evaluation and his mother's mouth. Frank Jr. Named without debate on the morning he was born by Pamela, who said, holding him for the first time, "Well, Dad, there you are," and settled it entirely. On the nightstand in the guest room, my room now, the room I used when I visited, which was often, there was a photograph I'd brought from Tempe. Frank in uniform, early 90s, laughing at something off to the left of the camera. You can't see what was funny. You don't need to. The laugh is enough. Melissa Hart sent a message. The IRS case had moved to final determination. She also said in a separate message that she was going to dinner with a man she'd met through her firm's pro bono program, a public defender who liked hiking and was terrible at cooking. And she wanted someone to know because she hadn't told her family yet and needed to tell someone. I sent back 3 words and a period. Tell me everything. She sent back a paragraph that made me laugh out loud at the kitchen table, which woke Frank Jr., who regarded me with his grandfather's expression of measured assessment. "Sorry," I told him. "Good news from a friend." He considered this, apparently found it satisfactory, closed his eyes again. Pamela came in from the backyard with dirt on her hands. She'd been doing something to the lavender she planted along the back wall, which was going to be spectacular in a year or 2 if she kept at it. She washed her hands at the sink, looked at the 2 of us, and sat down across the table. "He's thinking again," I said. "He's always thinking," she said. "What about?" "Unknown. He keeps his deliberations private, like his grandfather," she smiled. Outside, the bougainvillea moved in the warm morning air. its color so specific to this hour in this light that I knew I would carry it intact for years. The coffee on the table had gone cold while I was talking to Frank Jr. and not noticing the time. I picked up the cup. Cold coffee is a thing I've never particularly minded. You drink what's there and you move forward. That's most of what there is to life when you look at it closely. You drink what's there and you move forward and you notice the lavender and you hold the baby and you are glad in the particular quiet way available to people who have been through enough to know that gladness is not nothing. It is, in fact, a great deal. I want to go back and tell you about the night before the seminar, because I glossed over it and it deserves more than that. It was the night everything that had been building, the evidence, the plan, the careful patience of watching and waiting and not moving until the moment was right, crystallized into something quiet and certain. Frank called it the still point. He said every case had one. The moment before you executed the warrant, the moment before you entered the room, the moment when all the preparation was finished and all that remained was to act. You got very still at the still point. The noise stopped. You knew exactly what you were going to do. I was in the guest room at 11 at night, sitting at the desk with a cup of tea I'd made and not touched, looking at the documents arranged on the screen in the order I'd laid them out for Daniel. The bank statements, the draft reclassification, the Ray Santiago file. Melissa's written account, which she'd sent that afternoon, 12 pages, single-spaced, organized chronologically with dates and amounts and specific phrases she'd recorded because she'd known she would need to remember them. She was thorough. She'd been a paralegal for 6 years at that point, and she'd applied that precision to documenting her own life. And reading her account, I felt a particular gratitude for her because she'd had the presence of mind to save what she could when she could. I thought about Pamela, about the first time she came home from school crying because a girl in her class had said something cruel about her shoes, and how Frank had sat with her on the porch and hadn't tried to fix it, had just listened until she was done and then said, "Well, does she matter?" And Pamela, age 8, had thought about it and said, "I don't think so, actually." And Frank had said, "Good answer." And that had been that. He had this ability to help people locate their own solidity. I had watched Pamela over the past weeks relocating hers. She had it. It had been covered over, but it was there. And once she could feel it underfoot again, she'd stood up straight. I thought about what Caden was doing on the other side of the wall. He would be recalibrating. That's what this kind of person does when they sense the ground shifting. They don't panic, they recalibrate. They scan the situation for new leverage points. He would have noticed by this point that whatever he'd expected of me had not materialized. A compliant older woman, a grieving widow softened by sentiment, someone who could be managed into either compliance or departure with the right combination of spiritual pressure and family guilt. He had gotten none of those things, and the seminar tomorrow was going to be his reckoning for that miscalculation. I was not angry. This is the part that people sometimes find difficult to understand about me or about forensic work in general. The assumption that the intensity of the professional engagement must reflect the intensity of the personal feeling. But anger is not a useful instrument for this kind of work. Anger is imprecise. It makes you move too fast, make claims you can't fully support, push when you should observe. What I felt was closer to clarity, a very fine, cold, particular clarity. The kind you get when you've collected all the evidence and arranged it in order and you know, without any remaining uncertainty, exactly what happened and exactly what is going to happen next. I set the tea on the windowsill, sat for another hour in the quiet room, listening to the desert make its nighttime sounds. A coyote far out, the faint whistle of air through the gap in the old window frame, the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs. These small, ordinary sounds. Then I went to bed and slept very well.
The morning of the seminar, I was up at 6, made coffee in the kitchen before anyone else was awake.
Stood at the window and watched the sun come up over the desert in the particular way it comes up there, suddenly, without the long, slow arrival of it in other places, just the world being dark and then the world being lit. I had my blue blazer ready, hung on the back of the guest room door. I had Daniel's number in my recent calls. I had Inspector Waters' name written on a notepad from when I'd confirmed the appointment the previous evening. I had, in a folder on my desktop, every document I was going to need. I poured a second cup of coffee and took it to the back patio. The pool light was still on from the night before, making the algae glow in a way that was almost pretty in this light. The bougainvillea was doing what it always did. 2 hummingbirds were having a dispute over something invisible, moving so fast they were more idea than bird. I watched them for a while. I thought about nothing in particular. That is the gift of the still point, the absence of the need to think. The work is done. The thinking is finished. All that remains is the doing. I want to tell you also about the second confrontation, the one that happened between my public statement at the seminar and the arrival of Inspector Waters, when Caden came to find me in the kitchen, and it wasn't the stripped, shocked version of him I'd seen moments before, but the version that had done a rapid internal inventory and made a decision to try once more. He came in and closed the door. That was the tell, the door. He wanted a private conversation, which meant he was going to try something that required privacy to be effective. I turned from the counter where I'd been refilling my coffee. "I know what you think you've accomplished," he said. He was very controlled. The voice was back, quieter than natural, the version of it he deployed when he needed someone to lean in. "I know what you think happened in there, but I want you to understand something, Eleanor. What I do helps people, genuinely helps them. There are people in my practice who have been through real trauma, real loss, and they have found something meaningful and useful in this work. And what you just did, going in front of those people and saying what you said, that wasn't justice, that was destruction." I looked at him. I let the silence run for a moment. Because in an interrogation, you don't rush to fill a silence. You let the other person feel its weight and decide what they're going to put into it. "The man who shares his revenue with an undisclosed business partner," I said, "is not well positioned to lecture me about honesty." He didn't flinch. He was too controlled for that. But something adjusted behind his eyes. "I'm going to ask you something," I said. "And I'd like you to answer it honestly, not for my benefit, for yours." I paused. "Is there any version of this, any account of the past 2 years you can give me in which my daughter knew what was happening with her money and agreed to it? Not was told, not explained to, genuinely understood and agreed to it?" A long pause. "We had conversations. That's not the question I asked." Another pause, shorter this time. "She trusted me," he said. "Yes," I said, "she did. And that's the precise thing we're disagreeing about." I picked up my coffee. "The inspector will be here in about 15 minutes. I genuinely recommend an attorney." He left the kitchen. I heard him in the hallway, and then the sound of a phone call beginning. Clipped, low, and then nothing. He was making calls. He was reaching out to whoever in his system he reached out to in moments like this. That was fine. Let him. The documents existed independent of any call he could make. Pamela appeared in the kitchen doorway about 2 minutes after he left. She had heard, not necessarily the words, but the shape of it. She looked at me with those frank eyes. "You okay?" she asked. "Completely," I said. "Is he?" "He'll be fine," I said. "Or he won't be, but either way, that's no longer our problem to manage."
She came and stood beside me at the counter. We both looked out the window at the backyard. The hummingbirds were gone. The bougainvillea moved slowly in the early air. The pool light had finally clicked off, and the algae was just algae again. I keep thinking about all the things I should have seen, Pamela said. Not self-pitying, just honest. The bank statements, the way he talked about your aura like it was scientific, the way every conversation about money ended up being about his mission. I'm an accountant, Mom. I was a good one. He wasn't targeting the part of you that's an accountant, I said. He was targeting the part of you that was in love and wanted things to be what they looked like they were. That part doesn't calculate. She was quiet. The accounting mind and the loving heart have a difficult time working simultaneously on the same subject, I said. It's one of the most human problems there is, and the people who exploit it are very good at knowing which room to go in through. How did you know? She asked. How did you know from the beginning? I'm not in love with him, I said. That's most of it. I picked up my coffee. The rest of it is 28 years. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Then she said, What do I do for the next hour? Whatever you like, I said. This part doesn't require you. She nodded, poured herself a glass of water, went back down the hall. I heard the sound of her bedroom door and then quiet, and I stood in the kitchen and waited for the doorbell with the particular patience of someone who knows exactly how the next hour is going to go. 4 months after Caden left, about a month after Frank Jr. arrived, filling the house with a quality of noise that was somehow simultaneously exhausting and very good, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Scottsdale area code. I answered. Mrs. Marsh? A woman's voice. Young. Uncertain in the way of someone who has practiced saying something and is now saying it and finding it harder than the practice. Yes, I said. This is going to sound strange. My name is Devon. I was in the seminar, the day you came in, the open one. She stopped, started again. I'd been doing his sessions for about 4 months. I'd paid for 3 of Ray's sessions, too. A pause. I wanted to tell you that I looked into everything you said, and I know some of the other people from the group did, too. I just thought you should know. What you did, I know it probably didn't feel easy. I thought about standing in that living room, about the camera and the grid of faces, about what it looks like from the inside of a situation like that when someone comes in and says the thing clearly for the first time. It wasn't difficult, I said honestly. I had the facts. Having the facts makes most things straightforward. I wish I'd had the facts earlier, she said. You have them now, I said. That counts. She thanked me. We talked for a few more minutes. She asked how my daughter was, and I told her about Frank Jr., and she said something warm about that, and we said goodbye. I sat for a moment after hanging up in the kitchen of my Tempe house. Clue on the chair across from me, doing the thing she does where she appears to be asleep but is clearly tracking every movement in the room. Good outcome, I told her. She opened one eye, apparently agreed, closed it again. The coffee in my cup had gone cold while I was on the phone. I held it for a moment anyway, just the cup, the weight of it in my hands, the slight rough texture of the ceramic where a chip had happened and been smoothed over rather than thrown away. Frank bought me this mug at a gas station in New Mexico on a road trip in 1998 when I said I needed coffee immediately or I was going to become ungovernable. New Mexico's finest, it says on the side, which was optimistic given the origin, but the mug has outlasted a great number of things more carefully chosen. I drank the cold coffee, got up, fed the cat, went about my day.